everybody. My name is Anastasia Jagerman. I work at Optimum, and we're currently located in our Dallas office. And I have a very special guest today with me. Today's our first podcast, by the way. And welcome, everybody. And I have a quick funny story before I introduce my first guest. I met Chris at what I call the Secret Society meeting. And we all know what that meeting is. And he was a guest at that time. And the topic was about cannabis in particular, which will be one of our topics today. And I see this man at the other end of the room. You know, we're about 200 feet apart and the hands are going and everything is going. And he's kind of yelling out loud, I disagree. Cannabis has potency now, that kids have vape pens that have a potency of THCs. Back in the 80s, it wasn't like that. So I looked at him across the room. I said, hey, Chris, sit down. And he actually sat down. And I regret saying that because he's a esteemed colleague of mine, and it was not cool for me to do that. But when actually he sat down, I had his attention. I had everyone's attention in the room at that point. So this is how our friendship and relationship has started, from arguing about cannabis. So we're going to continue this. And I thought, wow, what a better guest to get than Chris Regione, because we argued about cannabis. So let's continue the argument, but under cameras and lights. And why not? So here's Chris Regione. I'd like to introduce Chris today. So Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And again, thank you for joining us today in our Dallas office. I can see the Dallas skyline behind you. It's quite classy, quite nice.
Well, thank you so much, Anastasia. And thank you, Optimum, for letting me be the first guest. I mean, it really is an honor, and I'm humbled to be here. And Anastasia, you know, when you were speaking, one of the things I think you left out of that story was you told me to hush and then sit down.
Correct. You're correct.
Yes, I was passionate.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm the chief underwriter for Salmon's Financial Group. I've been in the industry for 25 years. I'm aging myself. Direct side, I used to work for a reinsurer, and also I was an underwriting consultant on the brokerage side. So I have a vast spectrum of seeing a lot of different lenses, if you will, throughout my career. But yes, the topic is marijuana, and it is close to my heart as it is to yours, Anastasia. But before we go to the topic at hand, I live in the northwest suburb of Chicago, Crystal Lake. I am married, and I have two boys, a 20-year-old and 17-year-old.
Ah, what an interesting age. I remember that age quite clearly. I could just close my eyes and propel myself back at that age. So maybe I can provide insight on what some of the teenagers are seeing in cannabis, but now with the vape pens that you can get basically anywhere, well, where cannabis is legal, and maybe where cannabis is not legal also, you can get vape pens, but from Bubba instead of a certified dispensary. So anyways, regardless, even the legalization of cannabis is different in different states, and it's basically different everywhere, even in Canada, in Europe. So it's important to keep abreast of the laws and what can be done and what cannot be done. I'd like to present a fact. I have a slide here so that everybody knows. I don't know if everybody knows this, but the U.S. government owns the patent on cannabis. So it's a little odd because they've classified this drug as a Schedule I drug. So if you refer to the slide that we're showing, there's some details there that proves that cannabis, the government has already proven that it provides medical benefit, but yet the DEA has put it on a Schedule I, and a Schedule I drug means that there's no medical use for cannabis and that no studies could be done on cannabis. But yet you're seeing a whole bunch of studies coming out right now. One that I get very agitated by is headlines, because it's like, oh, breaking news, and you look at the title, cannabis causes increased heart rate, cannabis might cause myocardial infarct, cannabis might cause you problems with stroke. But then once you dwindle down in the study, you realize that that's the headline because they captured your attention, but these are all observational studies. So what that means in essence is that there is no form of conclusion, and the cannabis that they use is cannabis purely grown by the government, by the DEA. Because I don't know if you know this, but the government grows their own cannabis quotas. The DEA produces quotas every year on cannabis. And between the years 2020, which was when COVID started, to 2023, they more than 10 times produced their quota. Why? Because they want to do some observational studies on it. And because they're realizing that also that more and more states are legalizing it, and they have to get up with the times. But it's still very much the studies that you see on cannabis right now, and you see the headlines on Medscape, on all the other publications. Just be very cautious of what you read. That's all I want to say here, because once you dwindle down to the charts and everything and you read the final paragraph, even the doctor that's performing the study says, there's still not enough studies. Because when you think about it, the substance has been illegal for close to 90 years. So how can you conceivably make a study that would have medical properties and benefits when you're starting to study when cannabis is even illegal? So when you read the study, they say, oh, the study goes from 2007 to 2016. Cannabis was not legal in 2007. In some states it was. And it's all the same type of cannabis that's grown, and it's a very low percentage of THC, which brings us to our vape pen. I did the whole circle. Which brings us to our vape pens, and I want to get your opinion on this, especially with kids and adolescents. And we see that in underwriting. We do and we don't, because I'll tell you that it's rare. And you said you have 25 years in the industry. I will age myself even further. I have 34 years in the industry. The majority of my career, 25 plus years, has been in reinsurance. And I started in reinsurance, went to the direct, and went back to reinsurance. So I've seen quite a bit of studies, and I work very closely with R&D. And the studies that are out there, there's nothing out there that shows that adolescents, what is their outcome at the end, okay, of them starting to use cannabis at a young age, such as 15. Okay, so these studies are very, very sparse. So keep in mind, but I also have concerns because I'm very, as you know, pro-cannabis, but I also know that there's some risk involved with using cannabis at all different ages. But I want to focus with you today and ask you about your opinion about kids, because you have two boys and they're exposed certainly to cannabis in their school or their friends, because if they're not, then Crystal Lake is way more secluded than I think it is. But I would expect that they're exposed to that. Pretty normal. So what do you think about it?
Before I answer that question, I want to go back to one of your comments with the Schedule 1.
Yes.
And I agree, right? Of course it's a Schedule 1. But also, we know the majority of the states, it's funny, right? It could be a Schedule 1, but we also know many of the states it's decriminalized.
Yes.
So it's like almost speaking on both ends of the mouth, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to a drug. Because, for example, right, a Ritalin, it's a Schedule 1.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, it provides medical benefit.
Right. And if it's prescribed, you're okay. But if you don't have a prescription, right, it's
correct.
That's not decriminalized. No, you're going to be
right. And it has the propensity of addiction.
Exactly. So that, and also with the headlines, I think the headlines are the headlines, right? So it's no matter what outlet, from a social media or if you're TV, whatever outlet, the headlines are always going to grab the audience, grab the attention of the audience to read the article, if you will, or watch the station. But to get back to the kids and the adolescents in for cannabis is Illinois, as you know, legalized recreational marijuana. Okay, so the thing is, and we're having dispensaries pop up everywhere. Okay.
Yeah.
There's one literally right off the.
They're cash cows.
Right up the road from where I live, and
that's convenient.
For you?
Perhaps. Perhaps. I don't live in Illinois. No,
you live in Illinois, so maybe it would be convenient.
It's definitely not convenient for me. No, not at this point.
Okay, but the thing with the whole cannabis, and now it's legalized, right? With the kids, just like when I was younger with alcohol and in high school, well, it's legal. Or I see mom and dad having a, back in the day, an old style. So you're like, oh, mom and dad, I know I have to be older, but it's legalized. So, no, it's not going to affect me.
Right.
It's not, alcohol's not going to affect me, right? When you're young, especially in that mindset.
Right.
Well, now take, marijuana is the same thing, right? They don't realize that the brain is not fully developed until age 25. They don't realize that when you smoke weed, that it suppresses all the, dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, and the THC starts taking it over. They don't realize that when they're laying in bed and they don't want to go up for, get up for class, or they start disengaging in sports or the activities, that it's the drug that's probably, right, pushing that a little bit. There could be other issues, make no mistake. It could be, there could be mental health issues with the child, and they never even touched cannabis.
Right.
But, when I talk to other parents in our subdivision or in our community, it's an issue. And it's a big issue with the adolescents.
And I put it back on the parents' plate. And just like you would educate your kids on any substance, I put it back to your plate. I have no kids, so but I really truly believe that an education to your child from a very young age, not as a teenager, from age 8, 9, 10, that you must initiate that and make them know that that's not a good substance.
I agree.
It belongs to the parents.
I agree.
In my opinion.
Yes, I agree that absolutely. But even in my community, you have broken families, as in they're divorced, or the dad's not around, or the mom's not around, right? And now if you think about this, Anastasia, I agree. If you come from a solid parenting background, etc., but make no mistake, but if the parents are smoking the weed and they're seeing it and they're doing it in front of the kids, Anastasia, the thing is, parenting, just like when you have kids, there is no playbook. So to me, where I think it's wrong, might not be wrong to another parent. Now, that being said, I want to make sure when I said in my community, Crystal Lake, I want to make it very clear. It's all the communities in the United States. Back to the topic at hand. When you start with the cannabis at a younger age, here's my opinion, and my opinion only. We can argue that, is it a gateway drug? We can argue...
I would say no.
We can argue the benefits, but at the adolescence...
There is no benefit in
There is no benefit.
Just like any other substance.
And where's the mortality going to be the long term, the more and more
mental
of the
illness.
state? Exactly. So what's that mortality look like? And then what if you do have mental illness and you go to your GP and all of a sudden, or the pediatrician, oh yeah, your kid has anxiety issues, and the kid's not being up front with saying, I also smoke marijuana. Now you're taking a Lexapro or Zoloft or whatever else. So now they're taking a prescription drug to help, the dopamine or the serotonin or the
Which is all wrong to do. All wrong.
Then you're smoking weed on top of that.
Yeah.
Right? What is that long term? What is that long term mortality in our industry? And how does that affect, that whole population for cannabis and the respiratory issues if you're smoking it, or other issues that we might not know about?
We could talk about the respiratory issues a little further down. I'll come back with that. But you have a good point, but the studies that we forwarded you, again, it didn't take into consideration vaping high concentrating doses of cannabis. But there's no studies. Vaping high concentrations of cannabis, there's no studies on it. None. Zero right now. So the studies that we forwarded regarding the cannabis and future use in adolescence use, so if a kid starts at 12 versus a kid starts at 17 versus at 15, and you project in the long run, 20 plus years, either issues with employment, yes, mental issue, continued anxiety, but no real, it's more of a morbidity risk. To say that there's a mortality risk involved into long-term use, there's no studies that demonstrate that yet. So, and I think that by the time they demonstrate that, I won't be here anymore. You might not be here anymore because it's going to take a very long time. I mean, we're talking 20 to 30 years in the future. So,
but think about our industry, right? Mortality is typically 7 to 10 years. If we figure it out or we don't figure it out, depending if it's a new medication.
Yes.
I think of Ozempic right now. What is the long term, right? It's great until it's not great. Opioids, they're great until they're not great, right? So my point is we don't know, right?
Yes.
So with marijuana, we don't know just yet. Maybe there is more mortality in that mental health when people start smoking it younger and younger and younger, and we just don't know because, to your point, we don't have enough studies out there.
Exactly.
I would like to know what the mental health of the population that started to smoke marijuana between the ages of, saying, 12 to 17 years old before you become an adult at 18 in this country, as you know. I would like to know the studies.
They don't sell cannabis until you're 21 in the US.
Okay, I'm saying that people admit that they smoke. What is the ones that have marijuana use disorder, as in the younger males with ADHD? I want to see, the people that have depression or the bipolar, schizophrenia, excuse me.
Schizophrenia is also a target. That's why I'm saying that cannabis is not good to use as in teenage years.
But what I'm saying,
what is the mortality?
What you see exactly what you
We're talking maybe 2 to 3 tables, maybe, I don't know, because you would rate it for the underlying illness. You wouldn't rate it for the cannabis use.
Well,
yes
true.
And no.
Yes and no, because
Yes and
how
no.
much are you using? You're right about this. It's typically not the cannabis use. Right. It's why are you using it?
Right.
So my question is, I could go home and have a Coors Light or 2 Coors Lights. Let's say now I'm a cannabis user and I have 2 puffs or 2 hits of my buzz from that Coors Light of that 4.2% alcohol, maybe I won't even get a buzz. I take 2 or 3 hits, I'm going to be euphoric, right?
I hope so. We take people that take 4 to 5 drinks a day and we rate them, and we know how much alcohol causes damage to someone's life, to families, alcoholism. Where does marijuana come in there? How can you compare that to that?
I'm not comparing.
Okay.
But I want to get back to what you said with cigarettes.
Yeah. Cigarettes, vaping, all of that is an addiction.
So when
Caffeine is an addiction.
Okay, so when cigarettes started, and even alcohol, right? Prohibition, right? Because what it was doing, and then it came back because you always follow the paper trail about the money.
It's always
right, and the bootlegging and the mob, right? Back in the day, that's exactly what happened. The underground got a hold of the alcohol, and it was like, no, we gotta stop that because, right, the gangsters were shooting each other up and tearing.
You know which famous family was the greatest bootleggers? I won't even say their name. You should know as an American who they were. Yeah. Okay. And
this is not about the but my point is okay, you have the alcohol, you have the cigarettes, right? Do you think the cigarette companies didn't realize how addicted cigarettes and what they were putting in that?
For sure.
Okay, so my point is when does that happen with marijuana? You might say it won't be addictive, but what if somebody figures that out and they genetically synthesize or whatever they do with the plant to make it more like a cigarette that you need it every day?
I mean, I will tell you that people that smoke cannabis, once you reach a certain high, you stop.
No, I understand that.
But for alcohol, you don't. You go to a bar and it's last call. Most people are ordering 4 doubles. Oh my God, it's last call. You would think, oh my God, alcohol is going out of fashion. You pass a joint around a table with a group of people, and once you hit your 3rd hit or 4th hit, you're like, no. And you will see that very often. People pushing it back, saying, no, I'm fine. I
would love to have a cannabis bar and a bar or tavern and have cameras in there. And when somebody goes last call for the marijuana hit, I would love to see how many people are rushing up to get that last hit, because I bet you there would be everybody in that bar, just like everybody in the tavern, that's rushing up to get that last Coors Light.
I disagree.
Oh,
that's okay. That's fine. We're allowed to disagree. We're allowed to disagree. I disagree because cannabis doesn't have the same effect on people as alcohol. and you don't have the same reaction on cannabis.
I agree with that.
Cannabis
less fighting.
Alcohol, yeah. Alcohol
yeah.
causes a lot of motor vehicle accidents.
Oh,
Cannabis just delays your reaction, and there's actually tons of studies out there. Optimum wrote a green paper back in 2019. We were actually the first one to change our cannabis guidelines. I'm quite proud of that. We had Dr. Rigotti recreate our section that was not competitive. And after that, other competitors came through and followed. Why we did that is, if you show the next slide, it had to do with Canada legalizing recreational use of marijuana, but everywhere. So on a Canadian basis, and for folks that don't know, I'm Canadian. I'm originally from Montreal, so I'm not a Dallasite or somebody from Texas. I'm from Montreal. So Canada approaches things completely different. I mean, in America, this is my observation, and I can say that because I'm not an American. You want to generate like some form of a criminal activity, because you look at a map of legalization of cannabis and you see a bunch of states. I think we're at 38 states that are legal now. And in between states, for example, the state of Texas. State of Texas is still illegal. Cannabis is still illegal, but in Colorado and New Mexico, all the states adjoining Oklahoma, all the states touching us, it's all legal. What do you think happens? You're generating a scenario where a crime would happen. Okay, so it's well known that people hop in their car, cross the border, go to Colorado, do a
That's
week
why it's
trip.
decriminalized in most states.
Not quite yet all in Texas. In Dallas, yes.
Okay.
But not the rest of Texas. Yes, it's decriminalized because they don't want to put people in jail for a substance that's now legal in more than half of America. Right? And in Canada, they don't have that, because Canada, the government steps in. And I believe, not because I'm Canadian, but I believe that's the right way to do it, because here, not only is it still federally illegal, all the dispensary owners, all the cannabis owners, they can't even deposit their money in a regular bank. Why? If the product is legal and they track everything, I guarantee you, they track everything from the seed to the once you've sold the plant. And they have auditors, and it's a very controlled business. Cannabis business is very controlled with lots of auditors. They don't make it easy for those folks. So it's a hard business to be in, but yet they still can't deposit their money in the bank. That's crazy. And Governor Polis, I believe, from Colorado, is pushing very fast about this, the Safe Banking Act, which will bring it to our industry, which we will be able to reinsure or insure people that own cannabis business. Because why can't these people operate in a normal fashion, like a liquor store, and that's how Canada sees it. In Canada, they're all government workers. Okay, they all get paid, they all get benefits, just like alcohol. So, and they all tax it up the yin yang. And with that money, because like you said, it's all about the money, okay? And it's true, that's how the world works. That money, they use it in education, in kids' education, in explaining and helping also the parents to make them understand why the substance is legal, where it brings benefit, where you should stay away from it. So it's very upfront, very transparent. You don't see that in the US at all, unfortunately. It's too bad, because you would have a lot more help as a parent, because the government would kind of lead you and say, this is okay, we've legalized this substance, we're okay with it. It's off Schedule 1, which I'm hoping it's going to happen sooner than later, because it's been on Schedule 1 for 50 plus years. But it will be removed from Schedule 1, then a lot of real studies will be made. And then once it's removed off Schedule 1, then it will become federally legal. So they go hand in hand. So I don't know what's the weight for that, but I think it's, political. A lot of it is political. And I can't even begin to talk about politics in cannabis, because I can't understand in the US. But let's talk about, how does this affect our industry? Like, we see many cases. I'll tell you, I see both sides of the border. In Canada, the people disclose everything, okay? In the US, they've always fearful of it's rare that we would insure a kid that would, so the teenage use, it's like, first of all, the kid would never disclose it. Parents would sign the app, like none of this would ever happen in a situation like that, but that's even worse. Because for us, when we reinsure kids or insure kids, we don't know what's going on in their kid's life. We don't know if they're leading like an affluent life and they have a car and they have this and they have that and they have a yacht and they go with Daddy and Muffy and Buffy and whoever their names are and have like, you know, parties, like super parties, like jumping off the yacht and everything. And you're like, meanwhile, you're insuring this kid. You think he's like, you know, a church boy. He's going to church. He's a part of the choir. It's not that.
Well, but you can insure a 25-year-old and you don't know. I mean, if there's nothing that comes up, they could be just as crazy as a 17-year-old, right?
Yeah. And the 25-year-old doesn't tell you much more.
Exactly.
But in Canada, I will tell you the disclosures are phenomenal. I mean, it's so great to see. I've seen disclosures in the U.S. just recently. I will tell you, well, after it got legalized in the majority of the states, you see more and more.
Yes.
But where you see it more is in the affluent people and the people that got tons of money. Those big, large cases that we see, the $50+ million application, the guy will tell you, oh, yeah, I have a few gummies and it helps me sleep at night and I have a puff here and there and that's good. But in Canada, and go back to my Canadians, they tell you everything, down to the grams, down to the type, and they'll tell you all the drugs. They'll even tell you about psychedelics, which we weren't going to talk a little bit about psychedelics, but that'll be our next topic, by the way. And I will reach out to you also to do something else on psychedelics, because I've been talking a lot about psychedelics, and that's the next frontier, if you wish, because it's coming back to the surface. There's a renaissance about psychedelics right now, because it used to be used back in the 50s, and they had great studies on alcoholism. They would have one treatment. They would have two doctors in Saskatchewan that would test these on alcoholics, and the pickup rate was 50%. One treatment. That's phenomenal.
Let's go back to the cannabis and
Yeah.
some of your comments.
Yeah.
You got to remember, in the affluent market in the United States of America, they have access to the best healthcare in the world. Mm-hmm. They have access. So you're affluent. I mean, okay, so I take a couple or whatever that is.
Yeah.
I think then you have my generation, Generation X, and that still's iffy, right? It's like, what do we disclose? What don't we disclose,
Yeah.
right? It's still
A little paranoid.
Right, but I think you're going to see it, right, in my kids' generations, to your point, where they're going to disclose it like in Canada, regardless if it's federally legalized or not, because they're going to be like, I mean,
not a big deal.
You should hear my, 20-year-old. I mean, he talks about mental illness and people that he knows and college friends that he has, compared to how I wouldn't even know if one of my friends back in the day had any type of mental illness. And it's, what I'm saying is, it's so more exposed. Just like marijuana, and it's not to them, it's only marijuana.
Right.
When I was 17 years old, and I said it's only marijuana, everybody be like, right? It's on that spectrum of back in the day. That's like cocaine. That's like heroin.
Right. Well, because in the olden days, the war against drugs,
of course,
started that.
Yes.
Remember the egg in the frying pan? This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs, and the whole campaign against.
But
drug
that
war.
wasn't just about marijuana.
No.
Okay, so there are drugs that frying pan.
Nah, of course.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
All right.
I will agree to that.
Okay.
But I wanted to show this other slide and talk a little bit more about the endocannabinoid system. I don't know if you know this, but us as humans, okay, have receptors in our body, okay? CB1 and CB2 receptors, by the way, and they're part of the endocannabinoid system.
Yes.
Why somebody has never died from cannabis use solely is because we hold these receptors. So we have this connection with this plant. I know this sounds a little esoteric right now, but it is true. So if you do some digging, we have a lot of these same receptors that this plant has. These CB1 and CB2 receptors are on your brain and in your endo system, okay? We each use them. If you take too much cannabis, for example, if you were to take an enormous amount of a gummy, or you're trying to increase your tolerance because you're treating brain tumors or you're treating cancer or whatever, your system in your brainstem is a CB1 receptor and collects it and tells you right away, said, hey, you've took too much. You took way too much. So you took too much, and now the brain like ding, ding, ding is ringing the bell saying, hey, you got to evacuate this. So what happens is you throw up. So you throw up all the substance. And once you've done that, you probably go to bed for about 16 hours. And then after this whole event, nothing happens. You wake up and
Oh, that sounds like fun.
you're done. No, no,
well,
but I'm saying if the people are afraid of overdosing and you hear stories all the time, they're like, oh, people took a gummy and they got themselves at the hospital. They're in the ER. You see reports all the time, and we won't have time. Well, we could, but there's the Delta 8 and Delta 10 and 11, and that's another component of the plan, but that's synthetically produced. In any case, what happens when you go to the ER if you have this marijuana use disorder or that psychosis, they send you right back home. Okay, because they're saying, well, you're bogging down. We know you're not going to die. So go back home, eat a bag of Cheetos, get on the couch. It will pass. And that's the end of that. Don't
Well, I
come
think
back
they
here.
would wait until you sober up.
A little bit, but
Not
not
like
that
you're in
much.
and out. They got to do the basics, right?
Yeah,
In the
but
ER?
once they know how many milligrams you took, they know already what's going to happen. What's the course of it? So
But how do you know if you eat that cookie? Maybe you don't know. Well, now they will
they're
have-
all indicated.
Well, now they
unless you got
now
it
they
from
are.
a stranger,
Right.
Because most people that decide, and that's the problem, because when people start to take edibles, oh, look, it's a little gummy, it's nothing. They think it's a real gummy bear. Like, oh, let's take 4, 5, 6. Are you out of your mind? If you've never done an edible, you should start with the slowest milligrams possible, which would be 1 milligram, not 10, 1. And for you to get 1 milligram edible, it's very hard to do. You'd find it in a dispensary. You'd find maybe 2 milligrams edible. You cut it in half, and you see how you react. We don't, but that's what people do because they're like, oh, this is good. It doesn't taste like weed. But yeah, next thing you know, an hour in, oof, you find yourself palpitation. Your heart would start to race. You would start to have the sweats, and you would start to panic a little bit because everything seems distorted. You don't have your balance. You can't speak properly. And some people start to have chest pain and they have anxiety attack. So then they're like, oh, let's go to the ER. Well, ER is not going to do anything, but that's okay. That's a good reaction to have. But that's what happens. So if there's another fact that I wanted to show on a scale, on a physical harm scale, this is a diagram, and you've seen some of this before, Chris. It puts marijuana in a scale amongst the 3 most common social drugs. So you see tobacco, alcohol, and marijuana in the circle. And at the bottom of the scale is the physical harm, and the other one is dependence. Also physical harm upon yourself or upon your entourage. And if you look at where marijuana is in the scale, it's there. Alcohol is a little bit after, and tobacco is greater than alcohol. And then you have the others, the benzos, the amphetamines, and all the other different MDMA, which is something that's going to be legalized for PTSD coming up soon. But that slide for me is very significant. And this has been in a very published medical literature of the Lancet, which is a very big up and coming publication in the medical field, especially in France, because they do a lot of big studies there. But anyway, so that scale for me is very representative of what marijuana can and cannot do. But I will agree with you completely that marijuana is a dangerous substance with the younger individual. That I completely agree, 100%. Kids should not be consuming cannabis at a younger age, especially if they have ADHD or any form of mental illness, or even if they don't have mental illness, period. But we know they still do it. They still do it. You mean to tell me when you were 17, you didn't drink in college, or maybe you weren't in college at 17, but 18, whatever. But the legal age of drinking in Canada is 18. In the US, it's 21. So there's a lot of differences. But in any case, the kids do it right now, and we know it. Do we ensure that? Yeah, some of them we do, but it's a luck of the draw, basically. There's a lot of marijuana studies that were published. There's another information there that shows that marijuana study conducted in California between the ages of 15 and 49 after 10 years of marijuana use did not die any sooner than others that did not use it. So, and they had quite a bit of people in that study. So you're like, okay, all right. So they didn't. And then there's a Swedish study that says that they followed people in the army between the ages of 18 and 20, which had the similar life expectancy also. And there was like 45,000. It's an observational study. It's saying, here, we followed these Swedish army people for 2 years, and then they followed them in the future, and they had...
Okay, so how, but I have questions to that study. Is that somebody that, are they smoking every day? Are they smoking?
Yeah, well, you have to look at all the variables.
The variables, because that's a heck of a... I'll agree if somebody's having, get high on a Saturday with their neighbors, and they're not driving or doing any type of reckless behavior, I would agree that probably mortality is not there.
Yeah.
So how many people, though, then you look at that study, I like to see the people that are smoking the cannabis every day, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then where does that mortality fall compared to, like, how was it, well, I'm trying to really get at, how was the study
conducted and what all the variables are. And I mean, we have the data on that, and we have you'd have to refer to the study. I don't have it on the top of, this was just an outline, but we can certainly look at the variables. For us to look at one of those studies, we thought it was precise enough to include it in our guidelines for the manual. So when we redid, so that was part of the studies. There's another slide which has a lot of things on there, which talks about the pros and cons of medical cannabis use with people with chronic brain disorder. So there's some positive, there's some pro and some cons. So
I agree with you there, 100% with medical. There are definitely pros that where medical cannabis can definitely help somebody's life. Or towards their end of their life, that can help them ease the pain or able to eat, if you will, or
during
so many
cancer
things.
therapy. Yes. I know many individuals that have survived cancer, and their oncologist was all pro for cannabis. They say, if that makes you eat, go ahead. I'd rather you do that than I give you another prescription and another pill on top of the chemo to increase your appetite. If cannabis does the trick, do it. Go for it. So there are some benefits, obviously, like anything, but there are some disadvantages, like we said, in the younger ages. But the study also proved that the older you get, the better cannabis is for you. And I know some carriers will even elaborate. The older you get, the better it is, meaning you're not affected by any form of mortality or mortality with cannabis. It's what is associated.
I mean,
it's not the cannabis directly.
Anastasia, just like, nobody wants diabetes, but we know if you diagnosed as a diabetic age 60, 65, 70,
right, it's better.
You're not going to die from the diabetes.
Correct.
You're going to die from the cardiovascular event, most likely a heart attack.
Right.
Just like if you start doing marijuana and smoking marijuana every day at 60, Usually you're probably doing that for chronic pain. So, or maybe not.
Listen, though, he might be just an old folks hippie.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, at that age, to your point, I would agree, there's probably not that much mortality in the cannabis use. It's either they enjoy cannabis or they're using it for some
something.
Sort of...
And if it's for something...
then you're rating it for the...
Correct. You rate for the underlying condition. And I think that's the area we need to focus on, because when you say, what does it matter? Why people want to feel good every day? As you know, the nation, since COVID, everybody's depressed. Anxiety and depression and everything is on a spike, and it's gone up over the years, especially in the last 5 years. So for me, I find that cannabis might be a positive outlet, but you have to be very careful with mental illness also. Not bipolar, not schizophrenia. When I'm talking about anxiety, I'm just talking about your regular schmo that has a really anxious job, or he's an anxious person. And instead of him drinking, a bottle of wine a night, he's going to smoke a joint a night. I'd rather he does that.
Okay, fine.
And that's good.
You exercise?
Yes.
You run?
Yes.
I'm a runner. I
Yes.
like to exercise.
Yes. Yeah. And cannabis
Well,
also
hold on. And
doesn't
do you ever
affect your
go-
lungs, because I'll tell you, there's another slide. I have a
Hold
study
on.
about
wait,
this.
I want to
okay?
make. Let me finish my point
Okay.
with exercise. So
Okay.
when you go outside on a
Yes.
beautiful day,
Yes.
right now, like this, you go outside, get some vitamin D from the sun, walk around,
Yeah.
you feel good, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's natural,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It's a
So
natural high.
again,
It's
I'm
an
not
increase
saying
in
I'm
dopamine.
against. I'm not saying I'm against cannabis use,
Mm-hmm.
but before you pop a pill or you smoke a joint or
Yeah.
vape or whatever,
Yeah.
I challenge people, take a walk around the block, take that run, because that's going to make you feel good.
Yep.
So stop using the excuse of, not you, but people saying, I need cannabis to make myself feel good. Why don't they can try other things? Not saying that they need to quit their cannabis use, but you know what? Again, it comes to saying, are there better alternative things to make you feel better naturally? Of
Like
course there
mushrooms?
is. Well, we should discuss mushrooms. What I'm saying is that there's other ways than just always a drug, right?
Correct.
And that's where the cannabis, the alcohol, the tobacco, the coffee.
You say that to the millions of people that suffer from anxiety that are on effects or what's the drugs that they're on for anxiety? I forgot completely.
So
because
let me
everybody's on
ask you
them.
this. Are there more studies coming out on those types of drugs that
Yes.
they're not doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing? Perhaps not.
Repeat that. Are
There's
they study?
Isn't there studies coming out on these types of anxiety, depression medication that they claim that they're doing all of this and making all your
A lot of it is placebo.
That's what I'm saying. So
I mean, they know that pharmaceuticals know that 72% of SSRI medications are not effective.
Okay,
they know that
72%.
They publish that. They do that.
and we prescribe them.
Yeah, we prescribe them because
and
again,
we
it's
keep-
about the money. It's always about the left hand. Left
So are you saying big
money?
pharma? Oh wow. So wouldn't big pharma
It's one of the main reasons cannabis is still on schedule.
I was about to
It's
say
because of big pharma.
but if big pharma would take over the cannabis industry,
They thought about it.
don't you think it would be it would be do you
would be-
think it would be a different approach than we do today?
Yes,
Okay.
definitely. Yeah.
Understood. I rest my case.
Yeah, big pharma is definitely part of
Counselor.
that. Yes, it's definitely. But just to talk about, can MJ cause schizophrenia? To answer your question, it was yes. There's possibility that
Of course.
it would unroot somebody. But again, we're
Typically
not
younger.
talking about somebody that would
Typically-
be smoking a joint, because a joint doesn't have enough THC. 25 milligrams is usually anywhere between, depending on the type of flower, anywhere between 15% and 28% cannabis use. And a joint you peak, you go down, and everything happens within an hour. But for you to have an effect as such to bring out the schizophrenia, you'd have to take an edible.
But here's the thing,
You'd have
right?
to
Isn't
really...
schizophrenia? It's not typically, I'm schizophrenic and
No,
age
it doesn't
50.
happen like
No, it's typically at the younger.
There's two age group for schizophrenia.
But mostly-
17 and above the age of 50.
Okay.
By the way.
All right, fine.
And males.
Okay, in males, but let's take the former on that, as in the younger, right?
Yes.
So I think that just really, with the schizophrenia, with cannabis, it brings out.
Yes.
It brings out much
Yes.
quicker, and it's very,
Yes.
very,
Yeah.
it's instant.
noticeable. Yeah. The psychosis is present automatically. Which is that good or is that bad? Because now the schizophrenia was always there. Was it going to come out in 2 years? But now instead of coming out at the age of 19, it came out at 17 and a half because
But now
you
you
took
have
an edible.
schizophrenia with cannabis use disorder.
Yeah.
You have a double whammy. I'd rather take
Cannabis use disorder. Cannabis use disorder is more than one episode.
I
Let's
understand.
classify.
But saying you have a double whammy. Okay?
Yes.
Well, I'd rather take the 19-year-old that it finally comes out natural
Right.
more.
No,
Without-
I wouldn't be taking anybody's schizophrenia.
No. What I'm
taking
saying
cannabis.
is, I'd rather find out at the 19-year-old than a 17-year-old that's smoking weed every day and has schizophrenia.
You'd rather him not smoke the cannabis.
Right.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. But
Because,
I'm saying,
right?
well, what difference?
Well, because
would
they're
make-
going to cope with the marijuana.
No, well, they would
no,
take them off the marijuana
Well,
for sure. Yeah, they would.
I understand
Or either that or he becomes a street person.
but they would, but don't tell me that the kid can't get marijuana like that. And of course, when you're schizophrenia,
Right.
schizophrenic, you're going to do it.
You would hope the parents would.
Well, here we go again.
Well, that's a very.
You can't be a helicopter parent for your whole life.
I get that, but once your child is diagnosed with schizophrenia has a lot of mortality. Most people don't make it by the age of 50, 55, like a severe schizophrenic.
Right, because they're typically out on the streets,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
the parents give up on them, or they're like, I'm going to just go.
Yeah, and it didn't receive the proper treatment. Schizophrenia is a very complex disease, and there's very few schizophrenic. If you look at the incidence risk of schizophrenia, it's not compared to other mental illnesses, but it's still a concern, definitely a concern. Okay, and marijuana use disorder, we talked about it a little bit more, but I wanted to talk about the chronic, the lung issue, because a lot of people think that cannabis use is because it contains the tar, it contains different type of tar, but it's also a bronchodilator. Back in the olden times, they used to use cannabis on asthma. When people would have asthma attack, they would give them cannabis, and it would break the attack. So it's crazy to think that, but it is a bronchodilator. And it does, and there's a very low risk with lung cancer. There's a few studies out there, but inconclusive also. But there's also a risk, we talked about the risk about adolescents use. There's a risk in motor vehicle accidents, that we know. Not because they're going fast, because they're going too slow. Because once you're high on cannabis, if you're behind a car and you're going more than X miles per hour, everything is too fast. So you need to slow everything down. So you're driving 40 in 70.
No, I understand. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's not like, and you don't have like the vision distortion. I mean, depends, of course, what you took. All this to conclude on, there is some population study by N. Ains that shows that the mortality effect of the THC is completely mediated by tobacco. So when you look at a large group of people that take cannabis, majority of them, unfortunately, I shouldn't say 90%, I'd have to look at my numbers, smoke cigarettes.
Sure.
I used to smoke cigarettes. And I've quit smoking cigarettes. It's probably my biggest accomplishment. I've been smoking cigarettes since I was a teenager, a young teenager. And I finally stopped smoking cigarettes, and it gave me the ability, since 2017, I was unable to run a minute on the treadmill. And now I'm able to run an hour plus on the treadmill.
Fantastic.
So that's phenomenal for me. That was
and you're saving money.
And I'm saving money on cigarettes. Exactly. So it was part of the studies that we did, and we're quite comfortable with our guidelines. And I think if we go to the very last slide, I've skipped a couple of them, but marijuana and tobacco mortality by age. This is where I was telling you, if you follow the graph, in any case, at age 70 and above, which we're not there yet, but for males, mortality for cannabis use, and when we're saying cannabis use, we're saying daily use, okay? Yeah. Whether it doesn't matter for us whether you take an edible, it's the frequency, it's not the quantity.
Sure.
Because you get lost in the details. You could have it one gummy, go to bed, and that's it. Or you can have a whole joint, like it doesn't matter. So it was daily use of cannabis. So at age 70, you're actually better than the standard population. As a standard rate for male is 0.75.
Because you're rating them for something else.
No, that's no, maybe.
You're not waiting for, yeah, well, I'm saying.
But the cannabis use only, and the tobacco, like once you've eliminated only the cannabis use, because, he has a special program where he eliminates all the variables, just the cannabis use. But at age 60, there's mortality involved, like about plus 25 mortality.
So standard.
But it's so standard. Yeah. You wouldn't rate plus 25 in an individual. But once you reach the age of 70, you're below standard mortality. So that's why you see some carriers out there. I mean, again, it's rare that you will see, an affluent applicant who's 75 years old tell you, yeah, I smoke cannabis every day. Yeah, I've been doing this my entire life. It's rare. I've never seen one so far. But mortality states that we shouldn't have to be worried about something like that. You would hope that somebody at that age group is in good health in the other parts of his life, that he's not, heart disease, he had a stroke, he's amputated, like everything under the sun. Like you would hope that 70-year-old is a standard, like he has nothing going on. Like
Standard mortality.
He's a standard mortality risk, but he smokes cannabis every day. Now he's preferred. Well, that's what the data says. And some folks, some carriers out there will go and push the envelope as far as they can and say, hey, can we offer you preferred? You're a cannabis user. We'll tolerate that. And some users kind of use it to their advantage, or some carriers use it to their advantage and say, well, if you don't smoke more than 3 times a week, and now you've already given them the answer. So now everybody smokes 3 times a week, and now you can be preferred. But I mean, I find cannabis a fascinating story because it's been part of the human culture, has been part of Earth for thousands of years. And at one point it was legal. At one point they used to prescribe it in pharmacies. They used to, and you have old ads about cannabis use. Anybody can use cannabis until it all of a sudden became illegal. And that's a political thing that had to do with
So it was morphine at one time that you could just go to the drugstore and just buy it over the counter, right?
Yes.
And then they figure it out going, wow.
Yeah.
You just wonder down the road.
Yeah, but because killed people, you forget that.
But we're just touching the spectrum of cannabis, in my opinion, how these plants are getting reproduced, if you will. This isn't the 1960 weed.
No.
This isn't the 1960
No,
weed.
but growing weed is growing weed. Back in the 60s, they used the same process, and they're still using the same process.
Wait.
They
so
just
you're
have
tell me
different
that
plants.
THC is higher, and we talked about the
Yeah,
potency.
but you have some plants that have lower potentials.
Anesthesia. Nobody ever thought the iPhone was going to come out either, or the smartphones. Yeah. What I'm saying is, we can't kid ourselves what cannabis can or will become in the future. The only thing I will say is this. What humans create, social media, fantastic in so many areas. But what do we create?
I don't think it's that great, but anyways, carry on. Yeah.
But it's used for other...
Yeah. It's a vehicle of communication.
Right. Yes. But what I'm saying is there's 2 sides to every coin. Yeah. There's always a good side, but there's always going to be the side that abuses.
Sure. With everything.
Always going to.
With everything.
That's, Anastasia, that's my point.
Okay. I concur then.
My point is.
Oh my God. We should finish on that note.
No.
We should finish on that note.
With you
we
yet.
should finish on that note. I said I concur.
I don't know what it's going to be.
Point à la ligne, as we say in French. So I concur. Yes, we don't know where it's going to go, but I concur with you. There will be some benefit, and there might not be so many great benefits. Exactement. Voila. And on that note, I think we should end here. Yes, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate your passion, because I love people that are passionate, and we have to do this again. I think that there's a lot of things that I skipped over because I just think that, anyways, his podcast could last for hours, and I don't think that folks would kind of sit there for hours.
But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.